Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Jun-sok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Professor Young, good to have you back on today.
Happy to be here.
Well, stocks on Wall Street are coming off their worst week since March. Futures pointing to a positive open, though, on Monday. Korean shares did close higher today. What's the story in the markets?
Okay, well, last week was a pretty bad week for almost all the major stock indices around the world. As you mentioned, the U.S. had a really bad week last week. Taking the week as a whole, Dow went down by minus 6.5%. S&P went down by minus 5.6%. NASDAQ went down by minus 5.5%. Even the tech stocks are falling. They did not meet the expectations that the analysts had for their profit. So it's kind of surprising. The analysts seem to be over-expecting a lot of these returns. We saw that in China last week as well. They actually did fairly well, but it just didn't measure up to perhaps the analysts' over-expectation. But also, one of the contributing factors to the falling market is probably the uncertainty with the U.S. elections. There has been a lot of disturbance in important states for the election. For example, Pennsylvania is one or two most important states that the President Trump and Vice President Biden are fighting over, and there has been a shooting incident in Philadelphia concerning the police shooting a young black man. North Carolina police used pepper gas to break up get out the vote movement by African Americans, and North Carolina, again, is an important state. So the stock market seems to be reflecting the general unease of the presidential election in the United States. The EU indices are down as well, probably because they are going. Most of the major European countries, UK, Germany, France, are either in lockdown already or going into lockdown. And the uncertainty with the U.S. election is probably feeding the market there as well. Now, Asia, they had a very bad week last week. Hang Seng, Shanghai, Nikkei all fell last week, but they seem to be doing well today. So maybe the U.S. market and the European market will rise today as well. The Kospi, it was down last week, but it's also up today. It went up by 1.46% today. Kosdaq, it's one of the few stock indices which had a roller coaster ride, but it did end up higher last week. And today it rose even further. It rose by 1.30%. But global markets as a whole, they seem to be taking a wait-and-see attitude with the U.S. elections.
Well, now in Korea, we see that exports were down in October compared to a year earlier, as might be expected. But the daily average in terms of exports was the highest it's been in more than a year. That was the case in terms of shipments to the U.S., China, the EU, and ASEAN. Tell us about that.
Okay, well, we sort of expected this when we had the earlier result 10 days ago. From October 1st to October 20th, exports were down by minus 5.8%, and imports were down by minus 2.8%. It turned out for the entire October that the exports fell by 6.6%, and imports fell by minus 5.8%. But remember that we had two less working days in October because Chuseok came extraordinarily late, whereas in the previous years, Chuseok was mostly in September. So if you take the daily exports, then it rose by plus 5.6%, which is the largest increase we saw in 9 months, a largest increase in 2 years. And the trade surplus was $5.98 billion US dollars. We saw fairly major increases in semiconductors, biohealth, which went up by whopping 47.4%, home electronics, computers, batteries, and notably display. It recorded plus 5.2% in October, whereas it has been falling for the last 26 months. Now, the sort of the bad news in this October report is petroleum products. It's due to the continuing low price of oil. It fell by 50.1%. But region-wise, Korea recorded an increase in exports to U.S. and EU. U.S. and EU were coming off of very solid recoveries. Third quarter U.S. growth rate at plus 7.4%. Third quarter EU growth of plus 12.7%. But somewhat worryingly, China, exports to China has fallen by 5.7%, even though they had a fairly good recovery. And then the very worrying part is, as mentioned earlier, EU is going into lockdown. U.S. has the highest recorded infection of coronavirus. So fourth quarter exports are starting to get a little worried.
Well, it's election day this coming Tuesday in America. We'll be seeing results here Korea time in Wednesday afternoon or so. Hopefully we'll know very soon who's going to be president. But that and what else is on our radar this week?
Okay, well, most people are not expecting the results of U.S. presidential elections to be decided early, so we may not know the winner for days. For Korean statistics, there's consumer price index coming up and current account coming up for September. Now, for the foreign statistics, not only is there a U.S. presidential election, but there's a Fed FOMC meeting November 4th to 5th. But we don't expect any major changes because they usually don't change the monetary policy right after presidential elections unless there's a serious problem. And then on Friday, we'll see the U.S. unemployment and wage data to see whether the U.S. is on a solid path to recovery or what many people worry that U.S. recovery seems to be dying down because of the coronavirus.
All right, Professor, we'll look forward to catching up again later this week. Thanks so much for your insights today.
Thank you.